Mixture of angry and actually quite sad tonight. I'm sad because it's not often that you have a judge rule that are political leaders, which is something we suspected all along. And you can't just put the blame on this with TfL or with Sadiq Khan or with your local council, because of course our government has been complicit on this. This is spanning both left and right when it comes to the political divide, because of course Grant Shapps provided the money for your council, and in my case, Transport for London, in the judge's words, taking advantage of the pandemic. Have you ever heard of such a thing? A tragedy akin to thousands of people dying. Well, where thousands of people did die. It's not akin to it, they did. And a judge saying that they took advantage. It's just really, really quite depressing. Well, to discuss this, what action can be taken and what should happen next, I'm now joined by the Conservative mayoral candidate Shaun Bailey via video link. Evening to you, Shaun.
Evening, how are you?
Fine, thanks. Thanks for taking the time to talk to us tonight here on Talk Radio. Let's start off, Shaun, by getting your reaction to what the court had to say. I mean, for me, it's a pretty depressing day in politics when a judge actually using the judge's words that the mayor, street space, would take advantage of the pandemic to push through radical changes to London's streets. What do you say to that?
I mean, you've said it all, isn't it? When you're using a situation like the pandemic to force your political views, an idea you have on Londoners, it is a terrible indictment of Sadiq Khan's behaviour. And of course, you'd expect me to stand here and say, look, Sadiq Khan this, Sadiq Khan that. But it's a fact that the judge damned the actions of Sadiq Khan. He said he was taking advantage of the pandemic. If this was anybody else in any other walk of life, there'd be serious questions to be answered. And I think Sadiq Khan has questions to answer on this one.
And of course, this has a knock-on effect, doesn't it, for many local authorities, many of which will be in London, who have also decided to close streets without consultation or ongoing consultation, as we are being told, again, using the pandemic as an excuse, when in many cases, many of these plans have been in the pipeline for many, many months, in some cases years, but they just needed the right opportunity to bring them in, right?
You're completely right. Many of these plans have been around for a long time. And in the normal circumstances where local people would have had a much bigger say, they simply would not have got away with it. And what they did, they waited for this moment. They disguised it as in helping Londoners keep safe. And that simply was not happening. And they forced things through. And they were encouraged by Sadiq Khan because they knew that Sadiq Khan's TfL would support them in this action. And then people across London, I met a group of residents from Ealing, for instance, who are taking Ealing Council to court. Of course, the black cab drivers took Sadiq Khan to court, and they have and Sadiq Khan has lost in spectacular form. Very rarely do judges come out and make such what on the surface of it looks like a political statement. But of course, it looks that way because the idea of keeping us safe has been used to bamboozle us, trick us, and of course, seriously affect the income of black cab drivers and private hire vehicle drivers across London. Again, something that simply is just unacceptable.
Of course, Sadiq Khan and TfL, and I'll read their statement before the end of the hour, they have pledged to appeal this ruling. They will be keeping these measures in place, and obviously local councils across the UK will be looking at these rulings. Where will the money come from for this appeal and for the legal fees that TfL are going to incur for this?
So this morning, one of my colleagues asked that very question. He said, Sadiq Khan, how much does this cost? And what will an appeal cost? And Sadiq Khan said, I can't speak about it's an ongoing case. But when you have lost so unequivocally in court, the idea that you'll have an appeal, which will cost us more money at a time when we simply don't have that money to spare, is either arrogance or madness or foolishness. Take your pick. But the point is this, Sadiq Khan has lost and he's doubling down on it. And let's be clear what he's doubling down on. He's doubling down on a judgment that says he did not take into account the welfare of the most vulnerable Londoners, disabled and elderly people, people with mobility issues. He did not take into account the fact that cab drivers, black cab drivers, mini cab drivers were going to be severely affected by this. But yet he's pushing on through. And why this is important, because it focuses quite sharply on the arrogance of the man. You have lost in a court of law at a time of a pandemic. Take your loss and move on. Don't try to double down. Because remember this, if he loses again, he runs the risk of these LTNs being ripped out, which at this point, under my calculations, looks like it will cost us at least £45 million in wasted public money. And we just cannot continue to do that. Because at the same time, he's raising your council tax by 10%. And that's how we get in this pickle. He's not paying attention to what Londoners want and need.
And obviously at a time where we're being told TfL's finances are in an absolute mess, it seems quite bizarre to make that decision. However, I'm afraid to say, Shaun, and we've had this conversation before, the party you represent, the Conservatives, also have to take their fair share of blame for this opportunism and for ending up in this situation. Because Grant Shapps, again, he didn't put out this money to say, great, we'll put this out for consultation. Your Transport Secretary of the party you represent provided many of these local councils with the money to bring in these measures. Many people will be listening to this, Shaun, and I appreciate you coming on and fighting your corner here, but many people, understandably, will be listening to this saying, well, that Shaun Bailey's got some front, coming on, saying that he's absolutely furious with Sadiq Khan bringing these in, representing a party that financed most of this stuff.
So let's break this down. First and foremost, you're completely correct. This was financed by the Conservative Secretary of State for Transport. And you're right, I am coming on and saying I'm furious about these things. But let's be clear, what the government did, they have a green agenda. And I'm sure we're all on board with this green agenda. And they provided the money for London to address that green agenda, do something extra in this time of pandemic. What they didn't say was, go ahead, Sadiq Khan, and do as you please. What they didn't say was, Sadiq Khan, you waste all this money. They said you are the Mayor of London and you should administer this money properly. You have a great big transport manager in Transport for London. Please get this done properly. Talk to your local communities and give them what they need. What Sadiq Khan decided to do was drive through all of his lost and dead and unwanted plans. The thing about a low traffic neighbourhood, everybody wants a low traffic neighbourhood, but it should be done with communities, not to communities. And that's what happened. And let's be clear, my point in this, very early on, my first statement was this: these are being done against the will of local people. Let's pause. I started a petition and we fought and we fought and we fought. And I support people all over London who wanted to not have their LTN foisted upon them. Because I want to be clear. If you're in a place in London where an LTN would work for you and your local people, go ahead, have it if you want it locally. But please don't drop these terrible LTNs that build more traffic, make it harder for people to move around and cost money.
So which is it then? Because is Grant Shapps and the Transport Department, were they naive not to place conditions that these had to be temporary or that they had to be administered in a certain way to Sadiq Khan? Or, as some might suggest, were they being quite duplicitous in getting Sadiq Khan to bring in the measures they themselves wanted to bring in permanently, but wanted Sadiq Khan to get the flack for it? Because it's got to be one or the other. It's either naivety and poor planning or duplicity on their part.
I would put it to you like this. They have an agenda they want to follow. It is the legal setup in this country, in this town, London, that the mayor would have to do. That's the whole point of TfL. We spend literally billions, multiple billions a year on TfL. Their work is to make London work in this way, and they did not do that. So I would argue, of course I would, but the fault lies with Sadiq Khan. Because if the Transport Secretary is up to something, Sadiq Khan and local councils such as Ealing and Redbridge could have just refused. They could have said no. They could have just kept quiet, because what's very uniform about this situation is local people weren't running around asking for them. Councils were foisting them on people. And that's where the problem lies. And it all goes back to this core thing. Of course, people want low traffic neighbourhoods, but that isn't what they got. What they got was poorly thought out, in many cases, old schemes, unsafe schemes pushed on them with no consultation.
But if the plan long term, though, from central government is for road charging, closing off all the side roads and having Sadiq Khan do it for them, well, it works out quite conveniently for them, doesn't it, Shaun?
I'd say no, because if you're going to road charge, what you need is roads.
Yeah,
So
but no. But if you're going to road charge, you're going to charge for main roads. You close off the through roads to the side. You also create congestion by cycle lanes.
not
Brings a perfect climate to say, right, all main roads need to be charged for, and then people can't turn off those main roads to take shortcuts to get away from the road charging because they're all closed off. And I can imagine Grant Shapps rubbing his hands with glee at that prospect.
I have to disagree with you there. If you're going to road charge, the more roads you have, the more you can charge for. That's one thing. Secondly, it's a mileage thing. And if these LTNs do anything, they lower the mileage because you spend so much time sitting in traffic. So ultimately, I don't think they want to road charge. And if you want to be clever about it, there's many more ways you could have encouraged Sadiq Khan to have a conversation about road charging and get involved. What you've seen here, in my opinion, is a mayor who has no idea what it is to live and work in London. And I know that sounds strange as he's a Londoner, but there's a difference between him and his great big salary, his private car, and the rest of us who have to work for a living. When I went to Redbridge and I looked at the LTN, it was put in a place where cars are coming off the A12 and then having to back onto the A12, hugely dangerous. And when I spoke to a guy, he said, Shaun, this is ruining my job. I have to deliver. He delivers building materials. He said, I can't deliver building materials because of this. It hasn't been thought through. And they're the kind of things that happen. And
okay, so can you categorically right here state that if you are elected as London Mayor, low traffic neighbourhoods will be reversed, street space will be reversed, any idea of a £5.50, £3.50 charge to come into London will be reversed. The idea of extending the congestion charge to the North and South Circular will not happen. Will you be able to right here make those 4 pledges to my listeners?
Yes, 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 yes. Let's be clear. I've said yes to what you've just proposed all the way along. I've told people LTNs have been foisted on people, not the right thing to do. The idea of a boundary charge in London will, I live in Romford. I'm a Romfordian, as they say. That'll devastate our high street. We don't just go into the centre of London. We have people from all over Essex coming here and help us sort of run London. It would kill us. If you go to Barnet and all the other places on the Ring of London, they'll tell you that. So yes to all those ideas. The bottom line is, I believe that London needs to rebuild its economy, and that means letting people move around. All the things you've talked about and more put in by Sadiq Khan are anti that. He's a Zone 1 mayor. He has no care for what's going on out here. And more importantly, he has no care for vulnerable Londoners, the black cab trade, in fact, any private hire. And that's not my opinion. That was said today, this morning, by a judge.
But again, black cab drivers who have seen their industry being decimated by Uber, again, which was not properly moderated and not properly kept in check by a Conservative mayor and Conservative government, they have seen their industry being obliterated. They've seen extra charges. They've seen having to bring in electric vehicles. I would, if I was a black cab driver, be sitting here thinking, well, what is this man going to do for us? So tell us, why should a black cab driver trust you, Shaun?
There's 3 things I'd say. Firstly, I truly do believe that black cabs are a unique part of our public transport system. That's why I've always said they should be able to drive in all bus lanes. That's why the biggest threat to the black cabs is the ability to move around in London. I will free up road space to make sure they and all the commercial traffic can move properly. Secondly, I will give them an extra £10,000 interest-free loan to help them buy the cab. Because what I've always thought is a bit of a liberty. We force them to buy this cab. Cab's hugely expensive. I will come in and lower that cost for them so they can get on with it. And thirdly, they'll have a mayor who will listen. Sadiq Khan's plan, writ large from day one, has been to run the black cab industry into the ground. I will not do that. I will help them deal with things like the English language test and all those other...
Uber? What about private hires? Would you reduce the number of those on London's roads?
The Mayor of London don't have the power to reduce the number of private hire on the road. It's not within his power to do so.
All right, well, let's talk about then if Sadiq Khan is so terrible, and I think this is a big problem that you're facing, Shaun, and I say this with sympathy and welcoming a lot of the things that you're saying, but if Sadiq Khan is all the things you're describing, why aren't you trouncing him in the polls? Why are the latest polls showing, I think the latest one showed something like a 20-point lead. You've had an extra year to put your case across as to why Sadiq Khan is not the correct mayor for London. You should be absolutely storming it in the polls. Why aren't you?
I think there's 2 reasons. My big challenge has always been name recognition, because he spends your tax money advertising his political campaign. I'd argue that it's much closer. The poll you've read, of course, was put out with Sadiq Khan. The polling we've done would suggest we're much closer than that. And when it comes to the election, let's see how Londoners feel. Let's see how they feel. And look, as much as I will tell you I don't like Sadiq Khan, he's a terrible mayor, that is a statistical fact. He's a consummate politician with the support of the entire Labour Party. He has union money coming out of his ears. I am a small guy who stood up and said, come on, London. London could do better. We need a fresh start. I believe there's a lot of quiet, closet Conservatives, maybe first time they've ever voted Conservative. This is their time to exercise that. And all I'm doing is make sure that London has an alternative to the terrible mayor that Sadiq Khan has. I'm the fresh start that London needs. And if London's given me the chance, I will demonstrate to them what really could and should be done in London.
Shaun Bailey, listen, I know it's late. I appreciate the time that you've taken, and I know it took time away from your family as well. So thank you for taking the time to talk to us tonight here on Talk Radio.